do give us a call.
On 0845 905 949.
My guest in the first hour is Dennis Edwards. I've been to Bristol Airport to talk to him because Dennis contacted the show a while ago with an anecdote about when he used to work at Bristol Airport, long time ago, back in the 60s. But he was part of the crash crew there, who were always on alert if there was a crash.
Really? And what did you do in that instance?
Well, you helped out, but generally they was hanging around smoking and playing sport, because there wasn't much trouble, to be honest.
Yeah.
But Dennis has some memories of Bristol Airport, and the way it's developed over the years, we'll hear about that. All that plus Court Farm... Well, to meet my guest for today's programme, I've travelled to the wonderful surroundings of Bristol Airport at Lowellsgate, and with me is Dennis Edwards, who years ago, back in the 60s, worked here as part of the crash crew. Thanks for having a word today, Dennis.
Nice to be here, actually.
Yeah.
Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, and in fact, we're joined by quad spotters. They come out here regularly, don't they?
They do. It's a very busy spot and very popular, especially on the weekends with plane spotters, yeah.
I remember in olden times you could actually sit in the terminal and have a cup of coffee and just watch the planes come and go.
That's right, in the old terminal before security got, well, it's understandably tight as what it is nowadays, obviously.
Yeah. Are you a plane fan yourself?
Not particularly, no.
Although you do catch a lot these days in the course of your work.
Yeah, my work takes me away on a regular basis, about 4 times a year now. It used to be more regular than that, but to the Channel Islands and Gibraltar mostly.
And those are short flights, aren't they?
35 minutes mostly, yeah. Just about enough, you know, to get where you're going to without having to suffering too much.
Not quicker than going in a car.
Absolutely.
OK, well, it's time to the night where you started here. What was your first job here at the airport?
I worked in the offices for a cargo agent for a few years. This is when I first moved up here. And then in 1967, I joined the crash crew, a job which I absolutely loved, but I left in 69, sadly, but I had some wonderful times doing it.
Yes, you were only here for a couple of years, but we're going to talk about that period, because it made a big impression on you, didn't it?
It certainly did. The people were wonderful. It's a great place to work. The good old days would kind of sum it up perfectly, you know.
OK, well, let's explain what the crash crew actually did. What were your responsibilities?
Well, it's the fire service, basically, but they're far more sophisticated and more professional nowadays, but in those days we had a multifunctional task, you know. We had all kinds of different duties on the airport, but primarily it was to provide cover for accidents, if there were accidents or fires, obviously.
The name crash crew doesn't sound very encouraging, though, does it?
No, that's what they were affectionately known as. They had all kinds of different names, but again, primarily it was a fire service for the airport, which you're obliged to have, you know, a civil aviation requirement.
Now, the airport has undergone incredible changes over the last 20 years. Les Wilson, who was former managing director here, was a lovely guy and really sort of pushed the expansion of the airport. Did you know him at all?
No, I didn't. No, he was a lovely guy, and he coming after my time. He did a hell of a lot to promote the airport.
But since his death, he tragically died in a car crash. The airport has continued to expand, and now is a major concern. But what was it like when you were here back in the 60s?
Old-fashioned would be the best way to describe it, to be honest with you. The terminal, as you touched on, was basic. But it coped with the number of passengers that came in, but it didn't have the sophistication that it has today, but that was understandable. It was the 60s, wasn't it, you know?
What sort of number of flights did you have coming in out of here?
Very few, very few. Dan Air had a regular flight, and Cambrian used to come in with their services to Europe as well. But it's Dan Air that was a major user of the airport.
So how many flights are we talking? 1 or 2 a day, or?
Well, in the winter it was only half a dozen. Airlink to Dublin, they've been coming in a long time, but not an awful lot. Then summer you had the charter companies as well, you know, using it.
Yeah, it is a seasonal business, isn't it? Holiday times are always busy.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, go back to the 60s, the thing that summed it up for me, as I think I told you, was the cross runway, which you can see from here, which is 3-3. When the wind was blowing across the runway, it didn't have lights, so you had to put goosenecks, which is basically a watering can that you fill with fuel and set fire to, and that's what the pilots used to light to come down.
So they used those as guiding lights?
That's right, they were runway lights, yeah.
But they sound dangerous in their own way.
I suppose health and safety now they wouldn't be allowed, but it's all that was available in those days, so that's what was used, you know.
And there was a sort of initiation process for those that joined about putting them out, wasn't
Exactly, I was sent out to put them out after the last aircraft at Dan Air DC-3, and I didn't have a clue how to put them out, you know. You stand and puff and huff and puff, and as I look back after an hour, I put about 3 out, and about 4 would come back on again, you know, and then someone come out and told me you get a wet mop, hang out the Land Rover and drive up and down, you know, hit them on the head to kind of douse them. And it worked quite effectively as well, funny enough.
Just tell me a bit about the layout of the airport in those days. What were the facilities that were here?
Basically the old terminal, which is still standing. Where the new terminal is was a freight shed, which is where all the cargo come in and out of it. There's no cargo coming in nowadays, I believe. And that was about it, a few cargo agents around the buildings. And
Well, it sounds like you had plenty of time on your hands because there weren't that many flights. So you had a football team started up, didn't you?
we did. The good old Bristol Airport football team, yes. And we were first given a pitch to play right by the side of the runway where that aircraft has just landed. And again, nowadays it's unthinkable that you that would be possible. But in those days it was, of course.
Just to get this straight, could you play when planes were coming in?
Oh,
Or
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
So what if you kicked the ball hard and it hit the windscreen of the plane?
No, that wasn't ever likely an event, but it was about 100 metres away, but it was close enough to detract the opposition when we were playing if an aircraft landed.
Is it true that you got the kits from lost property?
We did. Yes, it was when Cardiff Airport was closed for a refurbishment, I think, and all the French teams came in here, all the supporters, and there was a kit that was hanging around for ages. I think it was purchased, it was all done properly, obviously.
But it was rugby kit rather than football kit?
Thick, heavy black shirts, yeah. Not the kind of thing you want to play football with.
Now, when you originally contacted me a few weeks ago, you were telling me about crossing the runway during a match. What was that about?
Yes, if I remember correctly, you wanted people that had been told off in unusual circumstances, and that fitted the bill pretty much smack on. We changed in Felton Village Hall to come up to play the pitch on the side of the runway. We didn't play that many matches there. We eventually moved somewhere else, but you had to cross the runway, and it was controlled by traffic lights, and it was all red, and I looked up to make sure there's no aircraft coming, and it wasn't, and I crossed the runway, and then let's just say I received a severe ticking off by air traffic control in the fact that I should know better not cross a runway on a red light,
Yeah, because they can come in damn quick, can't they?
Well, not that quick, to be honest with you. But I was frog-marched back through the old terminal and up the stairs in full view of everybody in football kit, football boots and all the rest of it. It was quite embarrassing, I have to say.
You don't hear much about problems at airfields these days. They're pretty safe places. Did you ever actually encounter any crashes here?
No, I'm pleased to say there wasn't. The only incident in my time was an Aer Lingus that crashed, a Viscount. It came in, its wingtip touched and it spun around and it broke its back. There was, from memory, I think it was an air hostess broke her leg, but I'm glad to say there was no fatalities or anything like that.
Like a lot of regional airports, there are no walkways right out to the planes. You get it at Heathrow, at Gatwick, at the bigger airports, but here you've got to walk across the tarmac, haven't you? It's a long, lonely walk for a lot of people, especially if they're nervous.
It is, actually, and there's a lot of people who pass comment about it, especially when they developed it the way that it has, that there aren't air bridges to aircraft.
Are you a nervous flyer yourself?
No. I quite enjoy flying, but certainly there are the odd occasions when the weather's really bad where I don't look forward to it, that's for sure,
Yeah. You say that you weren't particularly busy with the crash crew during your time here, but you had to be ever ready, though, didn't you?
Of course, yeah. You were always on standby, and you always had a specific duty. You were assigned a specific duty when you logged on, into the watchroom. And depending upon what that duty was, like in the watchroom, you had to stay there and control, answer phones, etc. And if there was an incident, the phone would ring and you would be given a grid reference, and then you would have to respond to that grid reference.
I suppose during that period in the late 60s, it was the start really of the Bucket and Spade holidays, right. And a lot of people going off to that sort of new experience for them.
It was, and Courtline were very much the early runners of that, although sadly they didn't last long. They used to operate very colourful aircraft as well, pinks and greens and blues. They were the livery on the outside of the aircraft.
Must have been quite an experience though for a lot of people who'd only ever gone off to Western Supermed to suddenly take a plane to Spain or Portugal or someone like that.
Yeah, it was the start of what's happening now, isn't it? It's hugely exciting, and it's relatively inexpensive then. I mean, it's not cheap, but people could afford it.
Did you see people come back, red as a lobster?
Yeah, the donkeys turned to their arm and the floppy hat and everything. Yes, it was all there. Yeah.
Well, it was an exotic story to tell your friends, I suppose, in those days.
I suppose, yeah. I was young enough in my 20s then to enjoy it myself as well. I can remember going to Spain the first time. It was great experience. At least you had guaranteed sunshine.
Now, you also had an incident here where you were driving the tender and there was a local dignitary visiting. Tell me about that.
You've got a good memory, yeah. Yeah, you're right. Then I was on the desk and I took the grid reference, and of course most incidents on an airfield are on the runway or off the runway. And I went tearing out the runway with everybody following me because I was a lead tender. And then somebody explained to me that the grid reference was in fact in the car park at the front of the building. So by the time I got there, the incident was over, So that didn't go down too well either.
Well, you only worked here for a couple of years, but looking back on your time here, you clearly enjoyed it.
Oh, it's fabulous, yeah. And I'm still in touch with a lot of people that were involved with the airport in those days. The football team, the Skittle team as well. That was a very, very successful Skittle team as well, with all employees. It was wonderful. I just think about everybody that ever worked here, certainly in the 60s, 70s and 80s, as it was developing, the camaraderie with everybody, you know, was just brilliant. It was absolutely terrific.
You mentioned the security earlier on, and these days it's very difficult to get too close to the airfield, understandably so, but the charm of that sort of thing's gone, hasn't it?
It has, and it's a shame, but it's a necessary precaution, isn't it, you know? I mean, I'm off tomorrow, as I told you, and you've got the aggravation of going through security, taking your belts off and putting your liquids in bags and everything, and it's all kind of a bit of a deterrent to the enjoyment of the experience.
Yeah, I suppose in your day, then it would just be a glance at the passport and that would be it, would it?
Well, yeah, I wasn't involved.
Quick frisk?
I wasn't involved on that side of it. I don't think there was any security at all, to be honest with you.
And the airport itself, as I mentioned earlier on, has expanded and expanded. It can't get much bigger than it is now. How have you viewed this advancement in air travel?
I think it can get bigger than what it is now. I'm not so sure about the route and what directions it can go other than across Fountain Common. But I think there's a capability with the new terminal, if they're going to build the hotel and everything, to be able to accommodate a lot more flights.
There's a little light aircraft landing behind us at the moment, and there's a lot of clubs based here who've got light aircraft. What's your view of the little ones?
Yeah, fun. My son has flown solo after. He used to work in the Aero Club over here when he was in his teens as well, and part of his payment was to take flying lessons as well. So, yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, you either like flying or you don't.
So in your view, it's a perfectly safe way of getting round?
Well, absolutely. The safest way, yeah.
What was the weather like when you were here? I mean, did you ever have heavy fog or snow?
Oh, yeah, we had it all, yeah. And certainly there was a routine that you had to carry out called RVR, which was runway visual reading from memory. And all it was a bucket on a stick up the runway. When it got foggy, you had to sit there and count the number of lights that you could see and report back to air traffic. And from that, they estimated what the visibility was and passed it on to the aircraft, you know.
Well, as we can hear, there's a lot of people here watching the planes as they come and go. It's still a very popular thing. It fascinates and excites people, doesn't it?
It is exciting, isn't it? Let's be fair. It's associated with exotic travel and faraway places, and it's just the business, isn't it, you know?
OK, well, let's watch as the next one goes off.
Another EasyJet flight.
Thank you very much for having a word today.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Nice meeting you.
That's Dennis Edwards and myself at Bristol Airport. And my thanks to Dennis for meeting up and having a few memories about working at Bristol Airport.